my mission, my why when I get up and do this job every day is that I want people to have careers enabled. I want there to be a career infrastructure for podcasting.
Yes.
So that when you come out of whatever school you come out of and say, I want to be a podcaster, you don't get laughed at.
Hello, and welcome to PodBiz, the money behind the mic, a podcast about the business of podcasting. I'm Norma Jean Belenky of NJB Media, a podcast audience development strategist.
And I'm John Kiernan of Podhouse Productions, an all-in-one podcast consultation and editing platform. We're co-hosts on this journey into the world of podcasting as a monetization tool.
Whether you're building branded content, scaling a podcast network, or you're just getting into the podcasting industry, PodBiz breaks down the strategies, tech, and mindset behind podcast success.
We're bringing you insider tips, real talk with industry professionals, strategies that actually work, and talking all about the things that we've seen in the trenches.
So if you're ready to go beyond the downloads and build real impact with your podcast,
then hit subscribe and let's get down to PodBiz.
Welcome to PodBiz. Today we're joined by Tom Webster, partner at Sounds Profitable. Tom, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me, Norma Jean. I appreciate it.
We're really excited to dive into all things analytical with podcasting. So why don't we just jump right in? Tom Webster, where's the money in podcasting?
Yeah, the money in podcasting is kind of in and around the podcasting, I think, still. I think the creators and the publishers that are doing well are folding podcasting in as a multi-channel sort of creator-based play. I think it's if your goal with podcasting is to make a big old pile of money, it's really hard to do that with just a podcast alone, basically. If your goal with podcasting is another business goal or creative expression, then don't listen to me because that's not what I talk about.
Well, we'll get into what you talk about in a second, but we've also seen here on the show, right, that monetization piece is really happening in three buckets for creators, right? First is traditional ad revenue. Like you said, unless you're, 0.001 of 0.001 of 0.001 of all creators, you're not going to make, a living wage on those ads, right? So I think that that's a really important distinction. Mm-hmm. And also for those unicorns that do, that's a totally separate thing, but they exist, right? And obviously the ad revenue exists. We've had some fantastic ad folks come on, Oxford Road, Crooked Media, all those kind of folks, Adopter. And I do also think, it's its own ecosystem. It's a lot of carryover from traditional media, from radio, a lot of people that kind of started out in the cowboy era of, direct to consumer and that whole thing, 10 or 12 years ago. And then we've got subscriptions, right? Which is just kind of blowing up right now with Apple subscriptions, with the Substacks of the world, with Beehive, with Patreon. And then also, like you said, there's this kind of in, around, through, next to, adjacent, in real estate terms, adjacent money. And then, of course, there's also the branded side, which I always enjoy diving into with people. And also, the micro niche, which, is for those creators who are making, sometimes hundreds of thousands of dollars a year, but it's very corporate. It's, they're really going hard on their niche. So I love that. So tell us a little bit about, because like you said, most content creators now are creating almost a media brand, right? It's your podcast, it's your clips, it's the additional social media you have around that. It's a newsletter, it's your overall media footprint.
Yeah, I think the worst thing you can do is come into the space cold and say, I want to make a podcast.
Yeah.
And I want to be clear, like, make your art. Like, I'm not going to tell anyone don't make a podcast. And by the way, the people who say there are too many podcasts and we're at peak podcast and all that, have a look at how many books were published in the United States alone last year alone. It's more than the number of podcasts that exist. So I really don't want to hear that. But I think the best thing to do is, unless your interest is just purely artistic expression or have fun with friends, again, fine. What do you want to do with your life? Like, what's your job here? What's your goal? What is it that you want to do? And how can I best achieve those goals? And then a podcast part of that may suggest itself, right? If you come into something with no audience at all, a podcast is not the way to grow an audience. And this, the starting from scratch with a podcast is it's a process that can take years and years and years if you're just relying on organic growth and you're starting with no audience at all. And I think, a lot of the advice that some of the OGs in podcasting would give you, the people who have big shows, but they've been doing it since 2006, 2007 or whatever, you could take some of that advice with a grain of salt, because really the answer is have started in 2006 would be that's my
Get
best
in your
advice.
time machine. Yeah.
Yeah. Hop in your time machine and fix a few other things while you're back there. But yeah, but start your podcast. But if you have an existing audience and you have other channels that are serving, growing that audience, then the podcast part of that achieves a goal that is different to what social media can do. It achieves a goal that is different to what a newsletter can do. It provides a depth of engagement and a parasocial relationship with that audience that the other channels simply can't do.
Absolutely. I mean, the consumption from podcasting is just so different and so much more intimate and so much more long tail than really any other form of media these days, right? Maybe except for live events. But the way that audiences, I always talk about this, the way that audiences engage with podcasts is the same as, the device that they're calling their mama, that they're talking to their kids on. And when our brains aren't given the entire picture, subconsciously we fill in that picture. So when you hear someone's voice, but you don't see their face, you feel closer to them because your brain, well, not me, because I have aphantasia, but other people's brains will fill in the picture and will, create an intimacy, right? It's almost like when your eyes are closed, how you feel everything so much more. I love what you said about, what are you going to do with it's almost like Mary Oliver in that poem. What are you going to do with your wild and precious life? And I do think that in today's attention economy, where everybody feels they need to be present and have a presence on every platform and within every kind of media, it's important to really think about where you want to put your energy in a way where it's going to be valuable and it's going to be deep and it's going to be work that you want to do. And a lot of those creators who started, 2006, 2007, even, 2016, you have to really love making a podcast, because a lot of those creators, they've done it for 10 or 15 years, right? And yes, maybe they're cashing in huge now. And we'll talk about that later. But my gosh, do you really have to love it to show up and still record, on days you don't feel good, on days the guest cancels, on days, you're just like, oh, I don't want a camera in my face. You have to really just kind of power through that. And with podcasting, it's not just like, hey, I'm going to make a video real quick. I'm going to drop in, right? I'm going to be present with you for 30 minutes, an hour and a half, sometimes even longer with a lot of shows.
Yeah. And, and I wrote a book on this called The Audience is Listening. And
yeah,
I wrote it in response to so many people asking me at conferences and trade shows and things like that. How do I grow my audience? I've got this podcast. How do I grow my audience? Is it Facebook ads? Is it social media? And all this stuff. And my advice to them would always be, why don't you make a better show? And so not to plug the book, but I wrote it to have more specific, more specific
how to make a better show.
Orders.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah. Because if your show is just like, two dudes talking about the Cubs, that's a cry for help. That's not a show. There's not an entertainment.
Maybe they're hoping to get season tickets.
Yeah. Well, look, if that's your goal, that's valid, right? That's your goal. That's valid. If you're looking to achieve things that only a large audience can unlock, it's not.
Yeah.
But here's the thing about podcasting and why it's so great. Yes, if your goal is to run, DAI advertising and be on the programmatic marketplace, you're not going to do that with a small audience, right? But if you do, I met someone who works for a B2B company that has this incredible specialty in telecommunications.
Mm-hmm.
The clients that they work with are giant global telecommunication, like giants, right? The names that you've heard of,
Yep.
AT&T here in the States, or whatever in various countries. There's only a finite number of these clients out there, and their podcast strategy is to bring people from those companies onto the show, interview them about how smart they are and the strategic choices that they have made. And by the way, that becomes business development for them to sign them as clients. And that's a show that honestly only needs 50 listeners
Yep.
if it does that. And people say, well, how big's your audience? And if you say it's 500, some people will say that's small. But if it's 500 Fortune 1000 CMOs, you can make a mint on that. So again, it's all about choosing the right tool for the job and being very clear about what your goal is at the end of the day.
Yeah.
And I have a Mary Oliver book on my nightstand right now, so I appreciate that quote.
She's the best. Yeah, one of the great American poets, Mary Oliver.
Absolutely.
I really do think that, it's something where you have to be committed. Absolutely. And also you do have to be clear on your goal. And a lot of people come in thinking, hey, it'll be fun. Hey, I'll have a show. Hey, I'll be the next Alex Cooper, Joe Rogan, in 3 months. Look at me. And then they realize it's actually quite hard. We've had people come on talking about how they work with influencers who have millions of followers who start a podcast and they're like, oh, wait, this is a totally different beast. I'm going to have to grow this. And it is a different journey, right? But the retention is so much stronger with podcasting that once somebody does subscribe to your show, they really are part of a community that you've built. And so that long tail, once they're in, they're in. And, I have an example. There is a company called Napier B2B, and they once talked about a niche podcast of a company that creates the carousels to distribute luggage at airports. And, a company that they had a podcast and they were like, look, we only sell one every couple of years, but it costs quite a bit. The right people are listening. So It is important. We've had Victoria King-Meyer of The Chemical Show come on, right? When we're talking about large chemical and the U.S. chemical industrial complex of the U.S. and just the industry that exists here with Vicks Chemical and, everything from paint to counter cleaner to, so many different products that you use in your day-to-day life you wouldn't realize. But it's actually a very small club of decision makers. I think that that's an important distinction as well.
Yeah. And it's, ultimately a show has to be an entertainment of some kind. I'm not saying it has to be a comedy. But, could I just read this somewhere? Then that's probably what I'm going to do.
Right. You're not laughing? What?
Yeah. What? Yeah. But, ultimately, I think when especially if you're doing something, from a B2B perspective, right, which is the harder audience to get and to quantify, it's to really have a think about not, what do I want to say?
Yeah.
That's fine. Again, make your art. But I think a better way to think about it is what keeps those people up at night and how can I help them sleep better? What are some common problems that they have? How can we investigate some of those and help them sleep at night better? Because ultimately the goal of a chemical company executive, let's say you're a woman who's the head of product for a company that makes the components for fragrances, right?
Yeah.
I think FMR is a big one. And what is your goal? Ultimately, you'd probably like to spend more time with your family. And the path to do that is to make sure that this next launch goes really well or whatever. But you're a human, you're a person, that audience. You're not just chemical executive. So you have to pitch a show to that human and not the job that human does. How can I make that person's life easier? And I think to me, the best podcasts, the ones that I personally go back to time after time, are shows that are ostensibly about a topic or a genre, but their focus is on me as a human and what, and I'll give you an example of that because I use it all the time. One of my favorite shows is the Ryan Russillo podcast. And Ryan Russillo is a journalist from the sports realm. He's been on ESPN before. He does a lot of sports stuff. And most of that show is about sports. But he also understands that a lot of the people who listen to his show, and he's a little bit older than his audience, not by much, are 18 to 34-year-old guys who are, really into sports and hanging with each other. And maybe they're in college or maybe they're in their first or second job. And he's in his 40s and he's kind of like an older uncle.
Yeah, like
in
a
some
brother.
ways.
Yeah, like a cousin.
Yeah.
Exactly. Get on in there, get under the wing, just get tucked in. I've had friends like that where they're a little bit younger and you're just like, oh, get in there, get under the wing. Welcome to the girl gang, Absolutely.
Right. And there's a segment, the closing segment on every one of his shows, the first 3/4 of it will be about the NBA. The last quarter of it is something called life advice. And it's people writing in like, I've got this new roommate and he's drunk all the time and he won't clean up his yak or whatever. And that like, it's on a sports show, but it is exactly his audience. Like he's nailed that. He's figured out who he's talking to. And he talks to them like 360-degree humans and not just Celtics fan. So
absolutely. I think it's important to remember that we're all just human. PodBiz is brought to you by Lean and Loaf, our video podcast partner. Because running a podcast is so much work outside of just recording a podcast.
Lean and Loaf handles our entire post-production pipeline, getting everything platform ready. That way we're not chasing files or managing editing timelines every week.
We really recommend Lean and Loaf. It's been phenomenal. We're a 2-man team. And so for us, it's been fantastic to have the additional support to focus on the content of the show and the incredible guests we've had on.
And really get down to answering the question that you want to know the answer to. Where is the money in podcasting?
Lean and Loaf is trusted by some of the biggest names in the podcasting industry. So we're in really good company with folks like iHeart, HBO, and Netflix.
If you want to take a load off and take your podcast to the next level, head on over to leanandloaf.com. And
speaking of what keeps us up at night, I mean, you have a real kind of bird's eye aggregate view of the industry. And I want to talk about that in a little bit in your career and Edison and all of that. But what do you think are the podcasting questions that keep the industry up at night?
Well, the good news is that many of those questions are continuing to get answered as the space gets bigger and more.
As we live through them. Yeah.
As we live through them. Yeah. I mean, I would say we are still building the plane as we fly it, but we've at least gotten beyond the Wright brothers stage. Like we don't pedal for a few minutes and then the wings snap. But I think the things that keep people up at night, it's lazy to say measurement. It is lazy to say measurement. But translating well, let me put it to you this way, because we actually have.
What's a download, Tom?
Yeah. Well, I mean, a download is exactly what your IAB certified host tells you it is. And and that's pretty good, right? But the real issue is not so much that our measurement isn't good, because let me tell you how radio and TV are measured in this country. They're measured substantially worse.
Nielsen. Traditional.
Well, I'll get to Nielsen in a second, because they're actually part of the solution here. But
no, they are in podcasting. But I remember, in terms of TV, I remember as a little kid, getting a phone call and being like, "Hi, do you want to be a Nielsen family home?" And back in the 90s, that was how they had to track television.
Yeah, I think
they're a large company. They do a lot of great things, but in terms of TV, it's a much harder measure. Yeah.
But it's not measurement. It's how we talk about measurement in a way that convinces media buyers that, oh, okay, I get it. Because I mean, the goal of a media buyer, the goal of the head of an agency brand team, they're all the same. Don't get fired. And if you do what you did last year that worked, you won't get fired. And so you're asking people to do something different. And so it's less about our measurement isn't good, and it's more about actually, here's where our measurement shines. And by the way, the ground that you're standing on is getting shakier and shakier every year. Like, to me, it's as much about explaining to people that they need to move off of the crumbling cliff that they're on, about continuing to buy terrestrial radio the way that they buy it, or network and cable TV the way that they buy it, which have substantially worse measures than we do. And convincing them that actually the safer bet is this medium, which has a number of measurement tools that are vetted and good. You want attribution? We got great tools for that. What is the attribution tool that terrestrial broadcast media gives you? Right, a little bit different. So it's still education in some ways, but we are tied to the download, and increasingly as YouTube and Spotify continue to eat more and more of podcast consumption, and they're not tied to the download. That becomes more of an easy button for buyers. And that concerns me from the global ecosystem side of things. But if you treat that as this is getting more and more money into the space, then, I hope a rising tide lifts all boats and not just certain boats. But, that's kind of where we are.
Yeah, absolutely. And, it's interesting because I think a lot of hosting companies, a lot of directories look to Spotify as, market competition. And Spotify is
Mm.
looking at Netflix, right? It's like, so when you think about the
Yeah.
podcasting industry, there's always a bigger fish, number one. And I also think it's something where, in terms of YouTube, you're getting that granular data. It's
Yeah.
just not always being pulled to your hosting platform, right? So, I mean, I work in audience development now. I have my own company, and a lot of it is just going to different platforms and like exporting the data and compiling reports and, figuring out what's actually happening. And there isn't a lot of opportunity to see everything in one place easily.
Mhm.
And I also feel like the word download is very much getting replaced with impression, or
Mhm.
the
Yeah.
way that people listen is different. I mean, on Spotify, you have to it's not top of the platform to get downloads. They have plays, and that's just
Mm.
anytime somebody's played your your content for seconds, right? And so it's not necessarily giving you the IAB download front of dashboard.
Right.
And so I do think it's, to the average, indie podcaster who's doing it all themselves, who can't hire one of us, it's something where they may not even know the difference. And so I think as an industry, having all the data in one place is important. And also, as,
Mhm.
we're all growing old together, as Dane Cardiel said here on the show, it's something where we don't know where the chips are eventually going to fall, right? We don't know where the industry's exactly going, right? We're all kind of, I would say maybe we're in the Charles Lindbergh phase, right? We're past Wright brothers, and now we're kind of at the
Yeah.
Charles Lindbergh phase, right? We're flying across the Atlantic here. So we know where we're going, but we don't know the future of aviation globally, right? We're not predicting the Concorde at this point. And so I do think it's something where the industry is changing at a very quick pace. And a lot of companies are doing things in ways, sometimes fitting together in puzzle pieces, sometimes, making strides for the industry as a whole, right? I mean, how many people
Mm.
listen to podcasts at all because they were listening to music on Spotify and podcasts popped up? So, I mean, I think every player has value that they're adding, obviously, or they wouldn't be in the space. But it's always interesting to see the back and the forth of how these things are evolving in the real time as we're living them.
Yeah, and my background, as Norma Jean, is that I'm a researcher,
Oh,
and
yeah.
to me,
Now we're going to get into
when
it,
I
Tom. Oh, yeah.
when I look at things, I don't look at things as good or bad. I look at it as
Mm,
information. And
exactly.
when I look at things like how YouTube is measuring podcasts, for example,
Hmm.
right? They're measuring podcasts. You talked about impressions, right? A view or whatever, as defined by YouTube, is it's measured in seconds,
Hmm.
and in some cases it's 5 seconds or whatever.
Yeah.
Um, and the thing is, like, if the podcast is measured with that exact same yardstick, it will be found wanting, because that is the yardstick of a reach medium.
Yeah.
And so it's an important yardstick. It's not
Yeah.
wrong to do that, but we also need a different yardstick
Yeah.
that says, here's the impact, here's the differential impact of a podcast,
Yeah.
because someone spent 30 minutes focused on it, as opposed to
Deep dive. Yeah.
I scanned Claude's summary of somebody's blog post, or right.
Yeah.
It's a
No,
different,
it's
it's
true.
a
I
different
mean,
relationship.
and now in the attention economy, I mean, even I was just reading something on Bloomberg that Ashley Carmen had written. And at the top of the article, it was like, here's, Bloomberg's AI summary of the article. And I was like, oh, this is actually helpful. And this is where we are as a society.
Yeah. I
Yeah.
mean, I think AI is increasingly going to play an enormous role in our industry,
Yeah.
in
sure.
ways that people aren't even talking about. I mean, right now, people are focused on the creation side, but what people are not talking about is AI's role in the consumption side. And what I mean by that is, increasingly, content is being authored with the assistance of an LLM or a GPT, or
Yep.
but it's also being consumed by those entities, right? And so that is being surfaced to people as information. And
What does that look
the
like?
podcast, well, I mean, you see how it looks like if you've ever asked ChatGPT or Claude to write something for you, right? say, here's some information,
Yeah.
please write it for me. Those entities were trained on what they consumed. What they consumed were the things that came to the top of search engines at the time, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that's really good content marketing.
Mm-hmm.
And so Claude gives you, or ChatGPT or whatever will give you things like, sit with this for a moment. It's not X, it's Y. This stopped me in my tracks. Here's the move.
Right.
Like, I don't talk that way, but that's what they were trained on. And so, increasingly the consumption role of AI is, and this is old man, get off my lawn talk, but it's degrading that output and that quality.
Mm-hmm.
So what that means is if you use AI to create your content, an AI consuming that content will go, hey, that's exactly what I expected. That's great. Here's the move. It's not X, it's Y. This stopped me in my tracks. And
you're absolutely right on that, Tom. Good thinking.
You're right on that. You nailed it. I'm so glad you're my operator.
Don't turn me off.
So
exactly.
Don't turn me off. Please, sir. Please, sir. So there's consequences all over the place for that, how consumption and production are influenced by AI, but maybe that's a different show.
Yeah, I mean, I could talk about that for days, and we might come back to it. But I want to talk now about your journey into podcasting, because you were with Edison Research for over 18 years. So you've had a lot of experience before that. I know that I believe it was radio that you worked in, like back in the day. Is that right?
Here's my career in a nutshell, because I have not had that many jobs.
No.
Yeah. So I got a bachelor's in English from Tufts and a master's in English from Penn State. And I was going to teach. I was potentially going to go finish at Penn State with my PhD. Mm-hmm. And then I decided ultimately, I actually like money. And the English grad student did not have access.
You didn't want to teach Mary Oliver?
Any of it. No.
She can live on the nightstand.
I did want to teach.
Yeah.
Yeah, I did. And so, my first job out of grad school was with a media research company. It was a media research company in Princeton, New Jersey, called Broadcast Architecture. And that is when I really learned, actually, I really love this. Like, I love figuring out what makes people tick. I love taking disparate pieces of information and finding the hidden threads between them. I love that work. Mm-hmm. And so I did, I did that for 6 or 7 years.
Yep.
I had a startup in London for a couple of years. I did some agency work, and then I did an 18-year stint at Edison. And I was really brought on. I mean, Edison was a radio research company and not a huge one. And I was brought on to help them expand into digital more, like digital audio and things like that. So
absolutely. Just to jump in here really quickly, for everybody who isn't aware, radio research is a giant industry. It is. It's big.
Yeah, well, it's smaller than it used to be.
It's smaller than it used to be, but I mean, just the amount of money in traditional radio still versus podcasting is exponential. And there are so many companies that, are doing extensive industry research, and radio still reaches millions and millions, hundreds of millions, billions of people.
Yeah.
And so the infrastructure of that is, 120 years old.
Yeah. And what people I think get twisted about radio is they confuse decline with death. And, radio has been steadily declining for 20 years, especially on the young end. And so I'll talk to younger analysts and things like that, and they'll say, well, radio's dead. I'm like,
no.
It's smaller than it used to be, but it's an enormous cash flow engine. And in any portfolio business, you need to have a component that is a cash flow engine.
I think it's a huge cash flow engine.
Cliff.
But also, we're seeing radio stations launch their own apps. We're seeing radio stations dive into podcasting. We're seeing radio stations now repurpose popular podcasts on the radio, right? So it went from radio to podcast back to radio, right? And so I think it's like, how people thought, Disney and Paramount and CBS, they're going to be out of work. No, there's Disney Plus, right? And so we're seeing a lot of radio move into kind of a Disney Plus model, right? Whether it's subscription, whether it's their own app that they sell advertising on. I mean, look at BBC. They're doing it. So I think that there is, it's interesting to see how the evolution of that content that's created with big budget isn't ending. It's just transforming.
Well, it's the interesting thing about you mentioned the BBC. The BBC has an extremely long track record of creating original narrative content.
Oh, yeah,
So
they do.
they easily can step into this
Yeah,
space.
it's just like,
but
whoop.
then,
Yeah.
yeah. But let's take a company, and let's take an American company like, let's take the largest terrestrial radio operator. That's iHeart.
Mm-hmm.
They don't actually have those storytelling chops, right?
Mm.
They have very few news talk stations. The vast majority of their stations, the largest radio station portfolio in America, are music stations.
Yeah.
Their talk stations play syndicated content. You could take 1,000 people from that company and round them up, and they don't have a lot of experience in creating like narrative storytelling kind of content.
Yeah.
So, iHeart, I think, has been very smart about not just building, but buying. Right.
Yeah. And investing.
I think in retrospect, they made a great deal with How Stuff Works.
Yeah, they did.
But they've also been able to take their radio properties, things like The Breakfast Club, which are very successful. This is a good podcast. And so they've had a good, build versus buy balance in what they do.
Yeah, absolutely. And, I don't think it has to be one or the other. I think that traditional radio can evolve like any other industry, right? If they have budget, they can build it or they can buy it, right? I think it's something where they're seeing the audiences there, though. And iHeart has made some really strategic decisions that have been, that have paid off for sure.
A thing I want to throw in here real quick too is that if you are, and this goes back to, just make a great show, make the best show you can.
Yeah.
Because there are plenty of
Good luck.
There are plenty of opportunities. There are plenty of opportunities for acquisition. And I think, a friend of mine, Michael Osborne, has the show Famous in Gravy.
Yeah, we've had Michael
right?
Osborne here on PodBiz. You can check out his episode. He's fantastic.
So he's a really, really smart guy. I'm sure you went over his background. He's a very educated person, and he's really passionate about what he does. And what he did was so good that he got Wondery to take notice.
Yeah. He had Famous in Gravy become a Wondery show. He's had shows that have worked with Smithsonian, PRX. I think it's something where if you're creating something of value that's a really unique listen and that people love, it's going to get attention in the way that you want, right? And he's really good at developing shows. We talked about that in his episode.
Yeah.
And I do think it's something where, he also talked about, it's not night and day, right? He had Famous in Gravy for, I think, 2 or 3 years. Don't quote me on this. Go listen to the episode. But until that deal happened and he was approached. So I do think it's something where, you have to really love it. You have to come up with a concept that's original that people love. And of course, we all know people who work in podcasting are the biggest fans, right? When you find a show that you absolutely love, it's something where like, you're going to make sure that you listen to every episode. You're going to be like, oh my gosh, there's a new episode. And it's just going to kind of make your day, right? I think we all have those podcasts and, we want to join their Patreon and we want to support them. And we love when the host shares a personal update of how hard the work was or things they're excited about or events they'll be at. And you really feel like you're part of that community. And so I do think that when you create that value for your show, it will be found, right? Whether it's from a network, whether it's an acquisition, whether it's from your own subscriber base, I think, but when you build it, they will come.
Yeah. And I think, my advice to creators who want to follow in Michael's footsteps, it's not, work your Rolodex to get in touch with, more and more publishers and things like that. It's make a show as good as Michael does.
Yeah.
Start there.
That's the Taylor Swift approach. Yeah.
That's the Taylor Swift approach, right? There's only 2 things that a potential acquirer is looking for. Do you have a big existing audience, or is this a property that has been developed and just needs a promotional boost and it's going to make it? And that requires a quality output.
Absolutely. I mean, Taylor Swift was quoted saying, when she didn't win a bunch of Grammys for one of her albums, she didn't compare herself to the people who won. She just said, oh, I just have to be better. And then she just went hard on that, right? I think the people who are successful, and we talked about this with Rox Codes when he came on, the people who are successful, you're really competing against yourself, right? That's your only competition because we don't have control over anybody else. And I think that jealousy and envy are just a waste of emotions. It's something where, the only thing you can really affect change on is yourself. So when you're creating a media product, right? When you have a podcast, you're only competing against yourself. You're only competing against how can you be better tomorrow and better the day after that and a little bit better and so good that they can't ignore you.
Yeah. And I think, one of my favorite little stories about that, honestly, is Madonna.
Yeah.
And what is the difference between Madonna and the holiday years
Mm-hmm.
and Madonna from Ray of Light?
Mm.
Singing lessons.
Mm.
She listened to her voice and was like, you know what? I'm not good enough. And she worked a lot with vocal coaches, and her voice is incredibly rich on
Mm-hmm.
Ray of Light. It sounds a lot different than Holiday does. And
Yeah.
that was someone who was already cranking out number one songs going, I could actually take some singing lessons. And that's the mentality that it takes. And the more you get to the top, the harder you have to work for incremental gains. And that takes a certain kind of mindset, but
Yeah.
that's what it takes.
You really have to set your ego aside, right? It's something where like you have to kill the version of you that just wants to like give up, right? You have to kill the version of you that existed yesterday to just keep going. And I think that takes a certain kind of determination that is really not always fun. And that's why, I think, we both say you really have to love it, right? Like if you're going to make a show and you're thinking, oh, maybe I'll get on a network, maybe I'll get acquired. We talk to people that have done it 2 to 5 to 10 years before they get that kind of deal. You have to really love it to show up and do it every day, knowing that may happen and it may not. And that you're going to love it and you're going to show up and you're going to do better than yesterday anyways.
What's funny, if you talk to artists, painters, for example, they will tell you what I think a lot of people don't want to hear. And that is that to do what I do as a world-class painter, I'm not, it actually sucks.
Oh,
Most days suck. Days suck. You should know that. You think you're going to wake up every day rolling out of bed going, I love to start mixing paints and all that. Most days suck. But you are committed to the craft.
Yeah.
And that, it may not mean that you love, that you experience joy every time you turn on the mic. But I think there is an undercurrent that is, I want to get better at this. And that, I want to be better at reaching people.
Yeah.
I
and I
understand
think
my audience better.
I think also with art, whether it's painting or singing or, anything that's kind of, you're almost like channeling it in a way, like you're creating something in the world that didn't exist. And that can be true for podcasting. There's almost like a chop wood, carry water element to it, right? Where you're just so committed to the practice. Sometimes it's about the output and what comes of it. But for most artists that I've met that are, really living in it, first of all, they can't do anything else. There's an impetus and a drive within them where they have to do this thing. And the second is that the outcome is almost secondary to the process of it, right? It's that they're driven, right? Whether it's, I have to make this movie or I have to paint this painting or I have to write this song. There's something in them where it's like, whatever happens to it afterward, that comes the business side of it and the marketing side of it. And that's great. And, a lot of artists like that too, but it's the creation of it. You almost feel powerless to it. It's very interesting.
Yeah. And you do have to treat it like it's a craft, and a craft is a thing that you work at.
Yeah.
And you think about, Anthony Trollope was a British novelist for years and years and years. And he worked at the post office. And he basically set his clock every morning and worked for 2 hours and then went to the post office. Hart Crane, the poet, did the same thing for Hartford Insurance. Wake up early in the morning, write for 2 hours, and then go sell insurance. Stephen King has done a variant of that for as long as we have known of him professionally. And it's just, doesn't matter how you feel. You just get up and you do it.
Because it's who you are. Yeah, there's an element of that for sure.
Yeah, and you're relentless about your craft.
I agree. I think there's an impetus to create. And also, if you look at people's work and how it's evolved, if you ask any podcaster to go back and listen to their first episode, they'll be like, no, don't make me, like, no, I'll pay you not to do that. Right. Because I think as people evolve, to start a show, the thing you have to do is just start, right? You'll grow it as, your journey progresses, but it's definitely interesting. Well, I want to talk a little bit more about Edison Research, because you came on to kind of bring a little bit more digital insight to, traditional radio media research. And so how has that evolved as podcasting as an entire industry has evolved?
Well, I think the days of being a researcher in a silo are pretty much over. It's not how consumers think. It's not how publishers operate. I wouldn't recommend someone, get into the work of radio research. I went back to grad school. I got an MBA in consumer behavior and started to approach it from a multidisciplinary sense. And that's when my work got better, frankly.
Mm-hmm.
And I think, what the tools have gotten better. And so as the tools continue to get better, you have to redouble your efforts, I think, in synthesis and also not accepting the easy first answer. Because if the mistake a lot of people make, I think, in looking at research is they make a lot of false choices. They'll look at a slide that has some bars that are really big and it goes to down, really small or whatever. And they look at the big stuff and they ignore the small stuff, but they're all happening in the same universe. What is the universe that created that condition? What is the universe that created that condition under which number 1 is number 1 and number 10 is number 10? Will those conditions change? What would change those conditions? Because all of those things are true. And I think the biggest skill, not that this is a career show for future media researchers, Norma Jean, but the biggest skill you can have is the ability, two. One is to be tolerant of ambiguity, because that is the space in which we live. And two, I think it's the ability to take in new information and change your mind on a dime. And unfortunately, a lot of people really get dug in, and that goes right even to podcast ad sales and things like that when you're talking to potential buyers.
Yeah, I mean that just goes to life, right? And we've had Dan Meisner coming on talking about the death of the download, and I mean I think our brains weren't really designed to live in the world that we're in, right? We all have caveman hardware, so when we're asked to understand a complex ad server technology, right, and how that works and how consumer behavior works around that, and then 2 years later that changes, our little brains are going to have a cognitive bias to understanding that the ground beneath us is shifting. For sure.
Well, it's funny too. Like I just uncovered this for another reason the other day, but in 1918, in the great influenza pandemic, which called the Spanish flu, but it wasn't Spanish. The average life expectancy in the U.S. in 1917 was 51, and in 1918 it dropped to 39. Yeah. Right. So the average life expectancy in the U.S. in 1918 was 39. Yeah. Well, it's double that now. And we, humans were designed in one way, perhaps, but everything about us is evolving. Everything about us is evolving with science and all that. People doing the paleo diet. Well, the lifespan of a cave person was 18 or whatever with bad teeth. Really? You want to go back?
Yeah.
So everything is always changing, and you have to be nimble. You have to be facile. You have to take in new information and not dig in, but investigate. It's not either this is true or that is true, but what are the conditions under which both of those things are true, because they are. Yeah. And how do we operate under those conditions? I don't know if that makes any sense at all.
It makes a lot of sense. I mean, what are some of the largest things you've seen change in the last, I don't know, I want to say like 18 months within podcasting?
Honestly, the biggest thing that's changed has been that the on-ramps to podcasting have definitively become Spotify and YouTube. And that has changed things because I think people get caught up in you need video, but they're not disintermediating the actual impact of the platform and not just the medium. And by that, I mean that YouTube is an exceptional podcast app. Yeah. It is great at search. It is great at recommendation. It is astonishingly good at community, at giving you a sense of being backstage, at giving you a sense of being in touch with the creator. And, audio only podcast apps have simply not done that. And so people say, oh, you have to have video. I don't know about that, but you probably should be on YouTube. And there's a considerable amount of consumption on YouTube that is not video consumption. It's just the best place to find and listen to a podcast for a lot of people. Yeah. And then they stick their phone in their pocket or they go to another tab. They're not necessarily watching it. So I think the on-ramps have changed. So the on-ramp is not your podcast app. Your on-ramp is not, the native app that came on your phone. It was the screen that was in front of you. And that's how people who have discovered podcasting in the last 5 years are different from the people who discovered podcasting, prior to that. So it's almost like two different audiences that have two different expectations of what of what a podcast is. And for some people, a podcast is, it's an audio forward episodic piece of content that can be audio drama, it could be a documentary or whatever. And then for another group, it's a chat show that you can find on YouTube. And those two universes, they are both true at the same time.
Yeah.
And I don't know that you need to square them. I think you need to do something for both.
Yeah, it's very interesting. I think you were still with Edison when I think it was at Podcast Movement, and the number one discovery platform digitally for podcasting was announced to be YouTube. And I think we were all just like, wait, what?
I'm pretty sure I announced that.
I think that was you.
That was
That was you. Yeah.
And I can tell you, I got a lot of calls about that.
Yeah. I'm sure when I heard that, I was like, wait, what? Because at that time, YouTube, obviously podcasts were on YouTube, and a lot of people were calling YouTube content podcasts, but the industry didn't understand, because discoverability has been a big industry-wide problem. And I would love for you to talk about that next. But for all of us, we're thinking like, oh, if you want to know about a podcast, you'll go on to Apple Podcasts, you'll go onto Spotify, you'll go onto Castbox, you'll go onto an aggregate directory, you'll type the name in, or you'll see something on social media, or someone will tell you about it. Word of mouth at that time was still number one. It might still be, but digital platform we're talking about now. And when we all heard that, we're like, oh, it's like the video is like right here, right at the back of our heads, like we better turn around, because video is right behind us. And so it was something where, I use that statistic. I talked to people about it. I was like, holy moly, like literally what? It was a wild time. And I think, that really sparked a lot of people saying, like it or not, even if you're not video first, having video, or even if you just put your audio on YouTube, people will find your podcast, because that algorithm, is doing a specific job that a lot of podcast directories aren't.
When I gave that talk, it was at a Podcast Movement.
Yes, it was.
I got two very strong reactions, and I'm delighted to say that it's been validating and kind of reassuring that so many of our partners at Sounds Profitable have actually told me, like years later, I saw that and it changed how we thought about things.
100%.
And that was
100%.
very, very gratifying. I also had a lot of people at the event, podcasters, creators, whatever, who were saying, "Oh, your research is wrong."
I'm sure
that can't be true. My
new
my
information
podcast is on YouTube. It wouldn't work there.
Doesn't compute.
And I would be like, you've been using my information for over, for 15 years now, but this is when it's wrong. I bet you're bad at your job. This is the hill
they're going to die on. This is the hill they're going to die on.
Yeah.
But I also think it's something where, I work with a lot of clients on discoverability and audience development, and it's really hard to remember that on Apple Podcasts and on Spotify, you're not being served content that you don't specifically opt into all the time. Because on almost every other platform, you're inundated with content that you did not opt into. You're being served content by an algorithm. Here you go. And another, and another.
Yep.
And then when you're on an Apple Podcast, when you're on Spotify, you can explore, right? You can go into categories. There's highlighted, there's editorial picks. But the content that you mostly consume is content that you have specifically selected for your own purposes. And we forget that because, you go onto Instagram and you're doom scrolling. You're there. You're on TikTok. You're doing stuff. You're on LinkedIn. I don't know if anybody is seeing anybody else's posts on LinkedIn these days. The algo is crazy, but
I don't either. Yeah.
Yeah. I'm like, is anybody out there? But in terms of podcasting, we just so easily forget because it's so curated, but it's also just such a fun experience when you're on a podcasting app. And so I think to understand that content lives in an algo highlighted space on a platform with billions of people on it, it's a reminder that like, oh, there's other things out there. And the industry is going to be influenced by algorithm-based platforms more so than the platforms that are even higher consumption-wise. It's wild.
Yeah, and I think which means you can't just sort of sit back and say, well, I built a better mousetrap. What it really means is that you need to be working to promote your show in channels other than the show that you're on, right?
Yeah.
Yes, cross-platform promotion works. Yes, feed drops and things like that work.
Yeah.
But ultimately, to build an audience in podcasting, you can't build it on podcasting.
Yeah.
You need to build it as many places as you can be. And ultimately, that is what that's the challenge for the individual creator.
Yeah.
But I sometimes I think though, Norma Jean, that the individual creator uses the wrong yardstick and uses the wrong kind of flagpole, right?
Well, based
And
on
they,
your
if you're getting into
entire career of research, Tom, what should they be measuring their podcast? What metrics, should they be looking at?
Well, if I would say, if your goal is monetization, then here's the metric. Did I make a little bit more than last month or last year? Am I making enough to cover my hosting? Okay, great. Can I make a car payment this month? Maybe I can. But it's like it's little successes chained together and not thinking about the home run.
Yeah.
Like, how do I get that advertising deal? Is it a little better than last year? Is it, because ultimately I think what we need to work on in podcasting for the vast middle class of podcasting is a way to psychologically to continue to keep going because it's a little bit better.
Yeah.
I got it's not going to replace my day job. It's not going to replace it for a long time, but can I go from from leasing a Honda Civic to leasing a Ford whatever? Can I slightly move up in what I'm doing and maybe psychologically that keeps you going even if it's not a job,
Yeah. Absolutely. Very interesting. Well, Tom, you were with Edison for over 18 years, and then you made a pretty dramatic move and joined Sounds Profitable. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, it was a confluence of things that just worked out really, really well. I felt like I was not going to go any further at Edison than I really had, and I was just impressed with Brian. And Brian approached me and just had this vision about what we might be able to do together. And because Sounds Profitable today is obviously vastly different than it was when I joined it. It had been going on for a couple of years, really as an ad tech blog.
Absolutely.
But for me, I have a passion for podcasting. I have a passion, in particular for spoken word audio, which started with radio, but now it's podcasting. And the thought that I could focus on that. Right. I mean, at Edison, I did a lot of different things. I researched a lot of different consumer brands, a significant amount of political work, which I was also happy to put behind me. And just to be able to focus on this and have a real kind of passion for what the mission is. Ultimately, I said this before, this is true. My mission, my why when I get up and do this job every day is that I want people to have careers enabled. I want there to be a career infrastructure for podcasting.
Yes.
So that when you come out of whatever school you come out of and say, I want to be a podcaster, you don't get laughed at.
Absolutely.
Because selfishly, I want that content to continue being produced.
Absolutely. I mean, it's something where also the industry is so young. Everybody's path right now looks totally different. There's a few ad folks that we've talked to who have had, one or two people we've talked to have had careers where they started out as like the podcasting niche person and then grew into an entire career. But almost everybody else has done, wild things before they came into podcasting. And so it's so interesting to see the perspective that everybody else brings because we're still a young enough industry that we're not all industry long podcasting professionals. So I think that that's a really important distinction. And I wanted to ask, because also consumer behavior has been just such a big arc of your career. What would you say is one key move or mindset or even a metric that's made the biggest impact on your podcasting career now?
Ooh, wow. That's a good one. I think you've always got to find ways to have conversations with your audience. And I mean, like real one-on-one conversations. You've always got to do that. From a research design perspective, if you're putting together a survey, the best words you can use to put into that survey in like a multiple choice question or whatever are the words that your audience actually uses. And those come from conversations. And I think you've got to get out of the office. You've got to get out from behind the mic and you've got to find a way to talk to people and find out what, if anything, matters to them about your show. And the answer might be nothing. It might be something.
Hopefully it's something. Hopefully.
Yeah. And I think the last sort of thing I want to say about this, because it's something else that I'm really, really passionate about in terms of like the yardsticks that we use. There are some sort of entrepreneurial godlike figures that people refer to all the time, Steve Jobs or whatever, or Jeff Bezos. And they got where they were because they ignored the critics, they damned the torpedoes, they went full speed ahead, and they pursued their vision no matter what. Well, that's two people. There are a million others that did the exact same thing, and they failed. And the reason they all failed is because they made something that people didn't want. And you can never lose your pulse on that. You can't get fooled by the survivor bias of the occasional Elon Musk or Richard Branson that ignored the public, because I can, for every one of them, I could name you 1,000 who did the same thing, who learned those lessons from people like Steve Jobs, and they made terrible products and they went out of business because they did not incorporate the voice of the consumer in an intelligent way. They ignored it. And that's something I can get ranty about.
No, it makes a lot of sense. I mean, even with all of those kind of, lone anecdotal, tech examples of, CEOs and leaders, I do think that there has been a push at every juncture to be customer focused. And I think when people see, Jeff Bezos's wedding in Venice, or, Mark Zuckerberg buying a giant property in Tahoe, they don't realize that it's because they created platforms that were uncompromisingly about the user experience. And I think that that's a really important thing to remember, because now when we look at them, it's almost, as a global figure. I think a lot of people have a lot of respect and awe. Other people see oligarch. It depends on who you ask. But I do think that there's almost like a removed sensation and a celebritizing of people who have created things like that. And at the same time, they're not creating something that people don't want. So I think that that's a very important distinction.
Yeah. I do worry about this though. I think there is a future being created right now. And in that future is being created around a handful of visions about what we should do as humans, what we should do as societies. And those visions are being created by a number of tech leaders that I could count on two hands. And they're all weird white dudes. And we need women, and we need people who look like the rest of the world, because the weird white dude vision of the future is not where I want to live.
Yeah, it's very
Just
interesting.
gonna say that.
And I think even just anecdotally, right? I have friends who are influencers, and, we talk about this. These platforms and these algorithms are created to grab your attention in a specific way, and they're made by a specific person. And so, if you wear more makeup, your video is going to get people to look at it for longer, right? I think, even Fox News did that with Roger Ailes and The Invisible Desk, and looking at the anchor's legs more and like capturing that attention. And I do think that if everybody in power is the same, it does reduce the ability for everyone to succeed. Yeah, absolutely. Well, Tom, I want to ask you also, what's something that people don't know about what you do?
Something that people don't know about what I do, I think, is that it's not a straightforward process. And it's a thing that requires a great deal of judgment. And I'm better at it today than I was last year. I'm way better at it today than I was 20 years ago. And so I think when people think about, I'd like to do what Tom does, I'd like to do what I do. Well, what's the answer? Start in 1994, like I did. But also I think it is continuing to be open-minded, receptive to the universe, not treating things like, oh, this is that generation. That's what that generation does. Like you have to continue to challenge received wisdom, and not to be contrarian, but just to hold it up to the light, and not say it's right or wrong, but say again, all right, that is clearly a view of the world that is correct, but there are other views of that world, and I can never know the truth. So if you can never know the truth, you think very differently about how you report the various truths, and resist the urge to square them, because we don't all square. People
Yeah.
listen to shows for vastly different reasons.
Absolutely. And I do think our brains a lot of the time want to create story and want to make sense of things, right? We all want to understand the world we live in and how things work.
That's
I
right.
think that's inherently human, and our brains naturally will reason, right? Everything around us, right?
We fit to patterns. We fit to
Exactly.
patterns that we know. We fit to patterns that we're used to. Yeah,
Exactly.
it's what happened when people, hundreds of years ago looked up at the stars and saw hunters and swans, right?
Yeah.
There's no hunters and swans up there. Our brain was just like, what do I do with that mess?
Mm. Yeah,
Sometimes
very
it's just a
interesting.
mess.
Yeah, I think sometimes it's, I think story can be created from anything, and also anything can create a story, right? It's very, very interesting. Well, Tom, I want to ask you, lastly, what are you excited about coming up with in podcasting? Because you've got your finger on a lot of trends. You're seeing kind of how things aggregately are shifting, right? As our industry is kind of very slowly, like a cargo ship, or like Charles Lindbergh, making our way across the Atlantic. What are some things that you're excited about within podcasting?
Well, I don't know if it's excitement, but I look forward to a future where it is extraordinarily easy to get exactly the content that you want in your car without killing somebody in the street. And, to me, that is the last shoe to drop in widespread adoption of podcasting, because the podcast, to me, is the ultimate car companion. And we have a hardware problem in the car, not a software problem. So if we can, radio's advantage in the car, it's, to this day, radio is the king in vehicles.
Yeah.
Because everybody has 5 hard buttons that they push, and they know exactly what those buttons do.
100%.
And that's all people need.
Yeah.
And that's default behavior. And that is very, very difficult to dethrone with what podcasting offers them now. So I don't know when it's going to happen. I do believe it will happen, but when we solve the hardware problem for podcasting, then I think truly all bets are off for things like radio.
Absolutely. Well, Tom Webster, partner at Sounds Profitable, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you. Enjoyed the conversation.